The suffering of the Palestinian people has gone on for a long time, but 63,000 have died since October 23. And we watch in live stream time on television children being starved to death. And even if a ceasefire came tomorrow and rebuilding began tomorrow, which would of course be wonderful, the mental health scars will be intergenerational for a very long time to come. The scars of war don't disappear with the silence of the last gun. And so it is our job as members of Parliament, it's our job as citizens to hold our governments to account of what is going on. And I have consistently raised these issues in Parliament along with a lot of my colleagues. We've asked questions after question after question about supply of weapons, about diplomatic initiatives, about supply of aid, and the use of RAF acrotery. And I introduced a private member's bill called the Gaza Inquiry Bill under the 10-minute rule procedure as a way of drawing attention to the need for a public inquiry in the same way that Sir John Chilcot's inquiry eventually inquired into the Iraq War from 2009 onwards. My bill got through its first stage, and the title of it was to make provision for establishing an independent public inquiry into UK involvement in Israeli military operations in Gaza, to require the inquiry to consider any UK military, economic or political cooperation with Israel since October 23, including the sale, supply or use of weapons, surveillance, aircraft, and Royal Air Force bases, to provide the inquiry with the power to question ministers and officials about decisions taken in relation to UK involvement and for connected purposes. I wanted to know what the equipment was that was supplied, what happened to all that intelligence that was picked up from the numerous overflying of Gaza that's going on, and what is the UK's definition of genocide, and crucially, what legal advice was given to the Cabinet, to the Foreign Secretary and the Defence Secretary, because I think we all need to know. My bill has been supported by 50 members of Parliament and numerous human rights organisations and many others. And we will continue with these efforts, and that's why we're here today. The results of our inquiry will be printed, will be made available, will be deliberately considered and provided to everyone to promote public debate. Because I think the truth needs to be told. Information needs to be provided. So if the government won't organise an open public inquiry, if Parliament won't effectively inquire into what's going on, it remains for us to do it. And that's what we'll be doing over the next 2 days here in Church House. And I'm looking forward to the evidence we're going to receive from a very wide range of people with amazing knowledge of the whole issue. And I'm joined as the three panelists with Professor Neve Gordon, who is after teaching for 17 years at Ben-Gurion University, he joined the School of Law at Queen Mary University in London. He's the author of Israel's Occupation 2008 and co-author of The Human Right to Dominate. And I'm delighted that he's here with us today. We're also joined by Dr. Shahd Hammouri, who's a lecturer in international law and legal theory from the Levant region. She's author of the forthcoming book, The Corporate War, Profiteering and International Law, published by Cambridge University Press. And she is teaching at the University of Kent. I'm absolutely delighted that we've got such esteemed panelists with us today and tomorrow. We're going to try and run as closely as possible to the times that we've set, because we obviously need to make sure we hear from all the witnesses, but also there's some giving video evidence at particular times, and I'm thinking here particularly of Francesca Albanese, who's got a timing to come in. So I will say thank you very much. My fellow panelists will now briefly speak themselves, and then we'll take the first witness.
my name, as Jeremy noted, is Neve Gordon, and I'm a professor of human rights and international humanitarian law at Queen Mary University of London and a fellow of the British Academy for Social Sciences. We have gathered here today to interrogate Israel's violation of international humanitarian law and the Genocide Convention in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and the UK government's complicity in these violations. My motivation for being here has to do with my upbringing. I was born and raised in Israel, and every Saturday until the age of 18, I would attend, together with my father and my older brother, the local Orthodox synagogue in the southern city of Israel, Beersheba. To be honest, it was not always the way I wanted to spend my Saturday mornings, but I did learn two important lessons from that experience, lessons that I have carried with me until this day. First of all, the great Jewish prophets looked at reality with eyes wide open and were never afraid to speak truth to power. Frequently, their harshest criticism was directed against the Israelites. They were often ignored, ridiculed, or aggressively scorned, but they did not bow down and persisted to speak the truth. Second, I learned from the book Dvarim in Hebrew, Deuteronomy in English. I learned from it and its command of us to pursue justice. Justice, justice, you shall pursue, it reads. And the repetition of the word justice comes to underscore not only the significance of the relentless and vigorous search for pursuit for justice, but also that the pursuit for justice must be done through just means. Thus, as I see it, one of the key roles of this tribunal is to follow these two principles or commands, namely to look at reality with open eyes and to speak truth, and to do so in the pursuit of justice. In my 20s, I went on to the university to study political theory, and one of the thinkers I read was the Jewish political philosopher Hannah Arendt. In addition to my early upbringing, the time I spent studying Arendt has also taught me several lessons that I carry until this day. Two of these seem to be particularly relevant for this hearing. The first has to do with responsibility and judgment. Arendt emphasizes the importance of individual responsibility and accentuates its role in restoring human dignity and resisting and realizing freedom. She also states that the act of judgment is fundamental to personal responsibility. It is, she maintains, our responsibility to judge political actions. Our judgment, however, must not be limited to the actions of the immediate perpetrators, but also the wider system of complicity that enables the perpetrators to carry out crimes. Indeed, when reporting on the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, she argued that responsibility is more complex than simply blaming the individual who pulls the trigger or the person who signs the extermination order. The entire system of political conformity aids and abets the monstrous acts and is therefore also culpable. The second important lesson Arendt taught me has to do with the possibility of punishment. Human action, she reminds us, is often unpredictable and can disrupt and violently destroy life. Both forgiveness and punishment can, however, act as corrective to this inherent unpredictability and frailty. While forgiveness is vital for human interaction within our common world, Arendt famously wrote that humans are unable to forgive what they cannot punish. The possibility of punishment, in her view, is necessary because without it, we cannot distinguish between the permissible and impermissible acts. Without it, in other words, we cannot assert that genocide is impermissible. When we cannot categorize acts as punishable, then according to Arendt, everything is allowed, entailing that we cannot judge actions and we cannot restore the stability of our common world after a horrific wrong has been committed. These two lessons should, in my opinion, also inform the tribunal. The idea that when judging responsibility for an act, we must transcend the actions of the immediate perpetrators and consider the wider system of complicity that enables the crimes, and that the possibility of punishment is necessary both for restoring human dignity and for the possibility of any future forgiveness. It is, I believe, our responsibility to the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank who have been subjected to monstrous violence to heed these two lessons from Hannah Arendt, while also speaking truth to power and pursuing justice. I firmly believe that this tribunal will lead us in that direction.
My name is Shahd Hammouri, and I'm a lecturer in international law and legal theory at the University of Kent. I stand in front of you today in the heaviest of hearts, after having stood witness to the genocide of my people for almost 700 days. We were told that we live in a democracy here in England, and yet the most basic tenets of democratic governance have been absent. Democracy demands commitment to honesty, the rule of law, an effective means to participate in decision-making. England, as Samir Amin notes, is ruled by what he calls low-intensity democracy, one where debate and representative politics are limited within the parameters accepted by the establishment. That is the economic and military elite of this country. The establishment in this country is at the core of a global system that creates a divide between different types of human beings, whereby some lives are worth more than others. This dynamic has been sharply exemplified in the past 2 years. State officials and dominant media outlets actively and knowingly distorted public perception of the reality in Gaza. They endorsed atrocity propaganda, used narratives that dehumanize and undervalue the lives of Palestinians, bluntly denying their lived reality at times. It's the same that they did with South Africa, with India, with Afghanistan, with Iraq, and the list goes on. They misrepresented their historical, economic, military, and political role in the genocide. They fragmented the picture and asked the British public not to contemplate the chain of causality. I say this with utter confidence because I know and I'm sure that reckoning with the reality of what is happening in Gaza and in the West Bank is imminent. That reality that has scarred the consciousness of humanity and caused untold sorrow. But only after it's too late. As Omar al-Akkad says, one day, when this is all over, when there is no price to pay, everyone would have been against this. And I look at that day with horror. After all our hands have been stained with blood. Meanwhile, in the courts of this country, and the offices of governmental legal advisors, alliances in the larger game of geopolitics were favored over basic tenets of national and international law. And in the streets, persistent demonstrations of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of the British public asking for the most basic of demands were systematically denied, undermined, and demonized. These systems were designed to serve the British public. It is their basic right, a basic right to demand not to be complicit in a genocide, a demand to save our souls, our humanity, our collective consciousness, and our quest for meaning. Less than basic. They did it in the name of the British public, claiming that this is the only viable foreign policy. And I would like to believe that if people were truly presented with the truth of the reality today, if they conceptualized, imagined, perceived, and felt what is the reality without anesthetic, the heat of a British-made drone exploding in a tent, the smell of burnt human flesh, 700 days of endless horror lived by 2 million people after it followed a long project of settler colonization and displacement. I would like to believe that none of them would want any role in causing it at whatsoever cost. Today, our mission is to bring an inevitable reckoning with the truth a step closer. To bring the public closer to collectively perceiving and conceiving of the reality of this genocide and the role of the British state in perpetrating it. In the absence of the basic tenets of democracy, our moral duty brought us here to stand witness to this historical moment and hasten it. Today we pay tribute to democracy, we pay tribute to justice, and we pay tribute to our common humanity in this historically decisive moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to my fellow panelists for the introductions they've given you this morning. We now move on to the first group of witnesses. We're going to introduce witnesses in 2 or 3 at a time. Each one is designed to last maximum 15 minutes, which is, roughly speaking, 10 minutes maximum for the witness to make their statement and then 5 minutes for us to question them. All of it will be published at the end, and indeed many may wish to add to their testimony by written statements, which of course would be very, very welcome, and there is no problem about that whatsoever. And so the first 2 witnesses we're taking this morning is Professor Nick Maynard, who's a consultant gastrointestinal surgeon at Oxford University and professor of surgery at the University of Oxford. He's travelled and worked regularly in Gaza and done a great deal to support medical aid for Palestinians, and also worked at the Nasser Hospital and other facilities. And he will be followed by Hala Sabbah, who is a Palestinian who lives in the Gulf and in Algeria and Jordan, where she's currently based. She's co-founder of the Samir Project, a Palestinian-led mutual aid group providing intense medical aid, food and material support to the people in Gaza, as well as supporting children experiencing trauma as a result of the genocide. I want to thank both of my witnesses for coming along this morning. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much for asking me. This has been I've just recently returned from my 3rd trip to Gaza since October the 7th, 2023. I've been to Gaza many times over 15 years. And this last trip I spent a month at Nasser Hospital. It's a great privilege to be attending the tribunal to describe my eyewitness account, which is, of course, essential to get this evidence from healthcare workers in the absence of any foreign journalists being allowed into Gaza. And I am going to talk about some of my experiences and daily witnessing of war crimes, daily witnessing of what seems clear to me to be genocide and ethnic cleansing. Hospitals have been targeted deliberately. I've seen that daily. We all saw the near total destruction of Shifa Hospital, but that wasn't just bombed. The Israeli military went into the hospital. They dismantled the whole infrastructure of the hospital. They destroyed the scanning machines. They cut the cables to all the ultrasound machines. They cut the cables and destroyed all the dialysis machines. They destroyed the laboratories. They destroyed the gas supplies. In Al-Aqsa Hospital, where I worked last year, the Israeli military bombed the intensive care unit whilst I was operating in the operating theatre next door. At Nasser Hospital, from which I have just returned, you will all have seen the bombing of Nasser Hospital 2 weeks ago, where they bombed the 4th floor right next to where I had been living for a month, right next to the intensive care unit and the operating theatre complex, which was severely damaged. And of the 20 people who were killed there, 2 of them were medical students who were being taught at the bedside on the intensive care unit, medical students whom I had been teaching myself 4 weeks previously. Healthcare workers have been directly targeted. More than 1,600 healthcare workers have been killed. More than 450 have been abducted, illegally detained, tortured. Many of them have been killed, including close friends of mine. The infrastructure of the whole healthcare system has been nearly totally destroyed in Gaza. We were operating with virtually no resources in the operating theatre, often no water to use to scrub up, to sterilize our hands and the equipment, often no sterile drapes or sterile gloves, because no aid has been allowed into Gaza. No painkillers. Let me tell you about Ali and Aya, brother and sister, who I treated in Al-Aqsa Hospital last year. They were the sole remaining members of their family. Their parents and their siblings had all been killed by a bomb that bombed their tent in Al-Mawasi, the so-called safe area, we're told, by the Israeli propaganda. Ali had a severe chest injury. Aya had a severe leg injury. We had to treat both of them without any pain relief at all. We had run out of all pain relief that day in Al-Aqsa Hospital. I can still hear their screams as we treated them without any anaesthetic at all. Let me tell you about Nada, a girl who came in 3 hours after Ali and Aya, who had burns that were so severe she wasn't going to survive. She wouldn't have survived in London, in Oxford, let alone Gaza. You could see her facial bones because the flesh was burnt so badly. She died an agonizing death on the floor of the waiting area of the emergency room, in pain because we had no pain relief to give her. An average of 30 children or more have been killed in Gaza every day in the last 2 years. The equivalent number in the Ukraine war is 0.7. In Iraq, 0.6. In Syria, 2. In Gaza, let me tell you that figure again, more than 30 children on average have been killed in Gaza over the last 2 years. Thousands of children have had traumatic amputations, be it arms or legs, sometimes 2, even 3 limbs. I've witnessed profound malnutrition caused by the forced starvation by the Israeli blockade and caused by the Israeli blockade alone. Let me tell you about Zainab, a little 7-month-old girl I helped look after when I was in Nasser just a few weeks ago. She was 7 months. She looked like a newborn. You could see every rib, every bone in her body. She was being fed with water mixed with sugar because we had run out completely of formula feed in Nasser Hospital. There was not a single bottle of formula feed. She died whilst I was there, and 4 days before she died, a group of American doctors had brought in formula feed, knowing there was a shortage, and those doctors at the border of Gaza had every single bottle of formula feed removed deliberately by the Israeli border guards. Nothing else, just the formula feed. That formula feed might have saved Zainab, but it was removed by the Israeli border guards. Let me tell you about Habiba, a beautiful 11-year-old girl who I spent the whole night operating on one night, just a few weeks ago in Nasser Hospital. She had a bad chest injury from an explosive injury by a bomb. I had to spend the whole night reconstructing her esophagus, which had been destroyed by the explosive injury. We couldn't feed her afterwards. She died 4 weeks later because we couldn't get any feed to feed her. And that feed could have saved her if it had been allowed in by the Israelis, and they had stopped that feed coming in. UNRWA used to run food distribution, and they had 400 food distribution points, as we will well know. They're not allowed to do that now, and the obscenely named Gaza Humanitarian Foundation food distribution points, there are 4 of those. They have been designed as death traps and designed to create chaos, rioting, and to facilitate the shooting of Gazan children. My last trip, I spent most days operating on young teenage boys who had been shot by Israeli soldiers at the food distribution points. And it was worse than that. Not only were they being shot, but there was clear evidence of targeting of specific body parts on particular days. So one day, 19 young teenage boys were admitted to the ER, all of whom had been shot in the head or neck. The next day they came in having been shot in the chest, the next day the abdomen, the day after that the legs. On one day, at the beginning of my final week at Nasser Hospital, 4 young teenage boys were brought in. This clustering of injuries to particular body parts was beyond coincidence. It was clear evidence of target practice by the Israeli soldiers on these young teenage boys. Gaza has been failed by our media. Only 2 weeks ago I was interviewed by the BBC and I was asked yet again whether there were Hamas command centres in the hospitals. This propaganda is being repeated by our media, being repeated by our government, and yet there is no verifiable, no remotely credible evidence to support those contentions, and there are vast numbers of witness testimonies from me and many other healthcare workers who have completely refuted those claims. I've been in these hospitals, I've had unlimited access to every square inch of these hospitals, and it is inconceivable to me that they are being used as Hamas command centres. Gaza's been failed by our government. I and many other healthcare workers have given detailed photographic evidence to senior members of this government and the previous government, and it has been ignored. They need to decide whether they want to believe the multiple witness testimonies from healthcare workers such as me who've got no axe to grind, we've got no political agenda, we're humanitarians, we are telling them as we see it, or do they want to believe the Israeli propaganda which is repeatedly being regurgitated by our media, and as I say, for which there is no verifiable or credible evidence? It is unconscionable that our government has not called for a full arms embargo. It is unconscionable that F-35 jets, for which our government is still supplying parts, are bombing those very children who I have had to operate on in Nasser Hospital and Al-Aqsa Hospital. It is unconscionable that they are still flying reconnaissance flights over Gaza, giving military intelligence to facilitate the bombing of Nasser Hospital 2 weeks ago. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that very, very powerful statement. Who wants to go first on questions?
I would like to thank you for that really horrific description. You focused on the harm and death that is currently going on in the Gaza Strip, yet the attack on the systematic and deliberate attack on the health system in the Gaza Strip will, I imagine, have long-term effect. So when you destroy a CT or other imaging or a dialysis machine, and when you kill the intellectual capacity of doctors, the medical students, can you say a few words about the long-term effect of what you have described?
Yes, most certainly. There has been clear evidence of a deliberate targeting of senior members of the healthcare worker profession in Gaza to undermine the ability for them to provide healthcare now and in the future. The educational system has been directly targeted. There are 2,500 medical students whose education has been interrupted. There are profound long-term effects. There are thousands of amputees. There are thousands of, or many, many hundreds of patients, for example, with colostomies, who will need major surgery to reconstruct their bodies. There are appalling signs of malnutrition, and even if there was unlimited food being allowed in, as from today, if there was unlimited aid, there would still be many thousands dying of malnutrition in the next few months. The mental trauma is incalculable. After Operation Protection Edge in 2014, it was estimated there were 500,000 children in need of immediate psychological support. Now, that was a huge military assault, but it pales into insignificance compared to what is going on now. So the mental health trauma is incalculable. Every single healthcare worker I have worked with in Gaza, many of whom I've known for years, are mentally and physically utterly exhausted.
Can you describe any anomalies that you saw in the injuries? I mean, through weird types of weapons, new types of explosives, and the like.
So the terrible explosive injuries I saw were predominantly from fragmentation bombs, which are bombs which have many thousands of very small pieces of metal in them, and when they explode, these thousands of pieces of essentially white-hot shrapnel destroy everything in their path. So everyone within 50 meters or so will be killed straight away. So we're operating on people who are hundreds of meters away. But these injuries are horrific. They often will have multiple entry sites, tearing through the lungs, tearing through the abdominal organs, causing incalculable damage. And of course, these patients are often very, very malnourished. So despite many hours of surgery to reconstruct their bodies, the tissues don't heal, they get terrible infections and often die because of the lack of nutrition. I didn't see evidence of burns with white phosphorus, but you'll hear from others who have seen that. I saw predominantly explosive injuries and the gunshot wounds, but some of the gunshot wounds, again, using so-called dum-dum bullets, cause incalculable, horrific internal damage.
Professor Maynard, thank you very, very much for that very, very powerful testimony, and I'm sure on behalf of many, many people, thank you for your humanitarian work and instincts and for coming here today. Could we now invite Hala to present her evidence?
Thank you so much. My name is Hala Sabbah. I'm Palestinian from Gaza, from Deir al-Balah, and I want to start my testimony by saying that the UK's complicity in genocide did not start on October 7th, and it did not start on the 15th of May 1948. It started on the day they stepped foot into Palestine. As the doctor has mentioned, I am here to talk about the aid situation, as I am the co-founder of the Samir Project, a mutual aid group that is Palestinian-led in Gaza. A lot of the international organizations have failed Gaza. They are not operating, or they're operating on a very small scale in Gaza right now. The aid since March 2nd, 2025, the trucks had stopped completely from entering Gaza. And this is why in June and July, we saw horrific images of children starving to death. Because even as mutual aid groups, we couldn't find food to purchase for mass distribution. Even the farmland, the majority of it is in Beit Lahia, which is no longer accessible. So very little farmland that exists in Khan Yunis was what was used to grow some vegetables. And then after an uproar to a certain extent, they started to let some trucks in towards early August or late July. Before the genocide, 600 trucks used to enter every single day during the siege that lasted 17 years. Those 600 trucks allowed people to live, but did not have everything that people needed. During the siege, a lot of children died because no medication was allowed in. A lot of children had to go to the occupied land or to the West Bank to get treatment. Today, every few days, 75 to 85 trucks enter into Gaza. They are very specific. The military occupation is very specific with what they put in these trucks. They put staples like rice, lentils, flour, but they will not put food that is fully nutritious to provide to these malnourished children that the doctor spoke about. No vegetables are entering Gaza. No fruit is entering Gaza. No medication has entered Gaza. We are running out of medication. We are getting thousands. It used to be hundreds, but now we are getting thousands of requests for heart disease issues, for blood pressure, insulin, all these kinds of things. And the few pharmacies that exist in Gaza are running out. So aid is controlled by the military occupation, and it's deliberately creating a famine, a man-imposed famine in Gaza right now. They have re-engineered it so that the international community goes quiet by allowing very few trucks in with very specific ingredients. The famine has not stopped in Gaza. Children are still starving to death. Zainab Abu Halib, who the doctor mentioned here, was someone we provided aid for. Zainab was lactose intolerant, so when we miraculously found some formula, she couldn't take it. It is the most vulnerable, children with celiac, children with lactose intolerant, children with chronic illnesses, children with underlying diseases. Those are the ones who die first. People with disability. So this is really, really important to understand that they allow very specific things into Gaza in very, very small quantities, creating chaos in Gaza, where people have to fight over aid, people have to steal aid, and this is all by design. This is all on purpose. I will give an example of Hani Adwan. Hani Adwan is a 34-year-old man who, during the roughest of times, went to the trucks to try and grab anything he can to feed his children. Hani tried to climb on a truck, fell, and was run over by the truck. All of his skin is gone, his hips are broken. He has a colostomy bag. We had to move Hani Adwan this morning from a hospital in the north to our camp, the Rifat al-Ari'ir camp in the central area, because they are now threatening over 1 million people to be displaced from the north to the south. This is after 2 years of displacements, famine, non-stop bombing, genocide, and now 1 million people are forced to go down into the south, including Hani Adwan, who still has a colostomy bag, who still hasn't healed from his surgeries. They had to take some skin from his thigh to cover the wounds, and he still hasn't healed. We have Maryam Dawas, a young girl who weighs 11 kilos. All of her bones are showing. She's malnourished. She also left the hospital and went to the south today, to our camp. We have Ahmed Al-Homs, speaking of weapons. a 10-year-old child whose brother got killed in front of him a year ago, and he inhaled poisonous gas and now is fully paralyzed. We have been pushing for Ahmed al-Hums to evacuate for a year, and he still hasn't left. Lina Shafi'i, a 19-year-old woman in our camp who has a kidney disease that's depleting her day by day by day, also hasn't heard anything about evacuations. And the UK has for a very long time supported and participated actively in our killing, has colonized most of the global south, and the hospitals that you visit today in the UK are built on our shoulders and the shoulders of our ancestors. Yet how many children from Gaza came to the UK for medical evacuation? How many? They're counted on one hand. Italy, Spain, other countries have hosted hundreds of children into their hospitals. The UK refuses completely. So not only is the UK actively killing us, but they refuse to help us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your powerful testimony. I have multiple questions, if possible. First of all, I'd like to hear about your team and on the ground, and what forms of difficulties that they faced as they sought to provide basic and necessary services to those most vulnerable. And also, if you could tell us a little bit about the informal economy that is being supported by Israel in one form or the other, but also how the prices change and create scarcity in the market. And last but not least, and I apologize, what is the risk that we're looking at today as we speak with the risk of further displacement?
Thank you. I'll start with talking about our team, the Samir Project and TechMed and Translating Palestine, all partners that we work together. We are over 110 team members on the ground in Gaza. Our team, just like everyone else, is under the bombs. Our team, like everyone else, their families face starvation. And in late July, when the starvation was at its peak, we had team members with temperature degrees over 35, trying to build tents, trying to get food, running around in markets, trying to do anything to provide for not only the vulnerable within our camps, the sick children, but also to other camps. And they would be fainting. We would have to bring IV and put it for our team members because they would faint. We would have to give them nutritional supplements so that they can get through the day and do what they need to do. Of course, we have told them multiple times to take time off and rest. But this is the resistance of the Palestinians, to keep going despite everything. Have I answered your question? Yeah. The second one?
The black market or
yes, regarding the markets and the market situation, we have a group of people in Gaza who are war profiteering from the current situation. These groups are fully backed by the military occupation. What does that mean? That means when the trucks come in, these trucks get looted. And when these trucks get looted, if anyone tries to stop the looting, the military occupation bombs anyone who tries to stop them with drones. So it's very clear that Israel is supporting the looting of those trucks, and then those war profiteers take the items and hoard them and slowly drip them into the markets at very, very expensive prices in a place where there's no cash, because no cash has entered since March. So people are constantly struggling. A lot of people don't have bank accounts. A lot of people don't have smartphones. So this leaves a huge part of the population with no access to money to purchase anything. And the last point I wanted to highlight as well regarding the displacement and the markets is that there's no tents. No tents have entered Gaza since March 2nd. We have provided over 1,200 tents over the past year, which we buy at very high prices from those war profiteering traders. And now that the displacement has started and people are scared and want to move to the south, those war profiteers who are backed by the Zionist occupation are refusing to sell those tents. They're not only refusing to sell them, but they'll put 5 to 10 on the market each day and are selling them currently for 3,600 shekels, which is over $1,000 without taking into consideration the commission that it takes to get the money into Gaza.
One question from me. Thank you for what you just said. How do people in Gaza who have no cash and no access to cash, how do they survive to try and get food or water or anything else?
So a lot of the children are malnourished, mild to medium, because of exactly what you said, parents not able to afford purchasing food or not able to do this. Late July and early August, there were no community kitchens for around 2 weeks, which amplified and made the starvation situation much, much worse. But when the rice and lentils started to enter, the community kitchens came back. So now there are community kitchens that serve camps. And when I say a community kitchen, I mean people get a pot, have a little bit of lentil soup for a family of 10 to 12 people, and that's what they have for the whole day. So their survival is at a very low level, and it's affecting long-term. That was a question that was asked. It's affecting their organs long-term, especially for the children. It's affecting the mental health of children. We have an initiative for mental health. We are seeing stuttering, isolation, aggressiveness from children. We are even witnessing children at the age of 7 or 8 not able to form sentences in the same way that they used to. So they're starting to flip the words because of how high the trauma is. And finally, I just wanted to highlight about those community kitchens that organizations that are coming from the West or from the global North are managing those. They are bringing people from the West to manage certain international organizations. And a lot of them, like the World Central Kitchen, is going and shaking hands with the Zionists, taking pictures with the Zionists, collaborating with them, while they claim to support people in Gaza. And even when team members of theirs were killed, they refused to say that they were killed by the military occupation.
Thank you both very much for the evidence you presented to us this morning. If you wish to add to it with any written evidence, you'll be very welcome to do so.
I'm going to introduce, so thank you very much. I'm going to introduce the next 3 speakers. One of them still has not arrived, but hopefully she will arrive during this session. So the first one is Bakr Abed. Bakr Abed is a 22-year-old Palestinian journalist from Deir el-Balach in central Gaza, formerly a sports writer who became a war correspondent as the conflict escalated. He has contributed to outlets including The Guardian, Middle East Eye, Al Jazeera, and The New Arab, and was named Journalist of the Year by Press TV in 2025 for his courageous reporting and bombardment. Welcome, Abu Bakr. The second witness will be Dr. Victoria Rose, who is a British consultant plastic and reconstructive surgeon based in London. Since 2019, she has undertaken several humanitarian missions to Gaza, most recently working at the Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis during the 2024-25 genocide. There, she treated large numbers of patients with blast and burn injuries, including children in conditions of extreme shortage of equipment and supplies. I think she has not arrived yet, but she will join us the minute she does. And finally, the last witness in this panel will join us on Zoom. His name is Jeff Halper, and he's an Israeli anthropologist and the director of the Public Committee Against House Demolitions, an Israeli-based political direct action group working for the decolonization of Palestine. And he's also a founding member of the Palestine-led One Democratic State campaign. In 2008, Jeff participated in the first and successful attempt of the Free Gaza movement to break the Israeli siege by sailing into Gaza He has served on the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian people, was a member of the International Support Committee of the Burton Russell Tribunal on Palestine, and is currently a member of the International Gaza Tribunal. So Abu Bakr, thank you for joining us today, and may you begin.
Thank you for having me. It's my honor to be here.
If you bring the microphone close to you, please.
I really didn't know. Okay, thank you for having me. It's my honor to be here. Yeah, okay. As you just mentioned, I left Gaza last April, and I'm sure some of you know the reasons, but the main reason was because I received direct threats from the Israelis on social media, and there were smear media campaigns, and that pattern of assassination that has been going on since the outbreak of Israel's genocidal war on the Strip has been clear for people. And so by April and in the early days of March, because she's been talking about the blockade of the borders in Gaza, so I diagnosed an acute malnutrition, and I'm someone with a weak immune system. So in the early days of March, I was diagnosed with severe malnutrition, and then my health deteriorated by the passing of time, and that was coupled with the threats from the Israeli media personalities that are still ongoing, unfortunately. And then I had to make a choice. I had to take a very agonizing decision, which was to leave the Gaza Strip on a scholarship, and I now live in Ireland. So here, when we talk about a living experience, because I've been reporting for a year and a half inside Gaza, and when we talk about Gaza, we should talk about it as someone from Gaza, as a human being first, as a resident, as someone from the land itself, not even a reporter, because reporters at the end are also human beings who go through a lot. And the first thing that I want to say, and I will always say, is the fact that we cannot say that people in Gaza are living at the moment, and we cannot say that people in Gaza before October the 7th, before this genocide, have been living. They're all, and they've been all dying slowly. And that's what I realized when I got out of the Strip, because when I saw the scale of life and the number of fussy, fancy buildings scattered all around, I really realized that Gaza had never lived, but it was suffocated, subjugated, and oppressed all the time. And because we were always under an unprecedented, unbelievable scale of suffering before the genocide, we never, the word never cared a whit about us. And then a genocide had to happen, so the word could even turn an eye to what is happening in Gaza. But what you're seeing at the moment is an extension of what Israel has been doing in Gaza over the past 20 years since the blockade, the very crippling and stifling blockade, has been imposed on the Strip. Before the genocide, university students could not afford the tuition fees. Most of them at the moment, as I'm talking to many of them, do not have certificates, and those students are not even accepted by the UK. Many of them are still trapped because the UK is making up excuses, the UK government, for their exit outside Gaza. 85% of the population before October 2023, they could not find dwelling to set in, and they were barely able to get a meal a day, and most of them were homeless and slept in the streets. That's life before October the 7th. And third, many people in Gaza, and one of them is my neighbors, died from cancer and from chronic diseases because Israel would deny a lot of people in Gaza permits to receive a treatment outside. And because there has been a very viral topic about the pre-existing conditions that have led or have played the major role in the deaths from starvation over the course of the past month in particular, these pre-existing conditions were caused by the Israeli occupation, by the Israeli siege. They were not caused because there was carelessness by the mothers and by the families of these children who died during the last 30 days. And we're talking about more than 150 cases of starvation. And for adults, and because I have a family still in Gaza and I fear about them all the time, what they are eating, what they're going through goes beyond imagination. We can't even imagine the fact that we are in 2025 and the stockpiles fall everywhere, and the leftovers that are being thrown in the waste box and bins all across Europe, particularly in Ireland and England, where I've been over the course of the past 4 months. These leftovers that are thrown deliberately all the time by people, and they take for granted they're enough to feed an entire population of 2 million people. We've reached a point where humanity has been failed by the entire globe. And for children, because I have nephews and nieces, and one of them is Ailul, she's 3 years old, and every time I call her, she cries for an egg. And she begs me to bring her an egg, but she couldn't even get it at all. And every time she sees a pen of watermelon, which represents solidarity with Palestine, she cries for her mother in front of me on a video call asking for watermelon. That's what Israel has caused. And I remember very well when she asked her mother why food is not allowed into Gaza. Why, as a mother, as my mother, can't you bring me eggs and chocolates? And she said, because Israel is blocking the borders. And as an innocent child of 3 years old, she asked her mother to fight and reopen the borders. And another thing about the children, because they are the worst sufferers of this ongoing genocide. When I was in Gaza, children, the neighboring children in front of my house, because Deir al-Balah is at the moment and before has been too increasingly overcrowded. We're talking about a 15 square kilometer tiny swathe of land of, before the genocide, 70,000 people, but now we're talking about nearly 1 million people. So the tents would be scattered all over around, and the tents would be dotting all the streets. And for Gaza, and for these children particularly, we see children, they are literally, people at the moment in Gaza that literally live in the pools of sewage, the pools of accumulative garbage everywhere. That's why we're seeing viral infections. That's why I had contracted with my family numerous times viral infections, hepatitis A virus and severe gastroenteritis and all these conditions and these viral infections that have been stalking the street for a very long time. And for my neighboring children, for many times in front of my eyes, I would go outside and see on the sand children drawing food in the sand. For example, I need a jar of Nutella chocolate, and they would draw it, and then they would start putting the sand in their mouths. And this is not the only case. This is not the only case. It's one in many. It's one in many, because just a few meters from where I am, there was a child who was selling his own books, his own school books. He was the best student in his class, and he would work day in and day out for many long hours under the scorching sun under the night. So his body would shiver from the cold during the winter in Gaza, and his body would be very spotty and burned because of the scorching sun, because Gaza is a very hot weather all the time. So he has only one piece of clothing. He's always barefoot. He doesn't have anything in his tent. It was in his tent, and the only thing he had is just empty plates. It's literally empty plates. So this is what starvation means. Starvation means that we, because I'm someone who's come from Gaza and I had to eat pets' food, meat specified for cats, and I can assure you that the cats' meat and food that are being sold right now in the markets here is much better than the original food that I used to have in Gaza. And also, we had to drink contaminated water, and the past symbol is no longer good to use because it's still ongoing. So every time I talk to my family at the moment, they would have severe stomachs because of the contaminated drinking water that people drink all the time. Yesterday, I was talking to someone from Gaza, and imagine the level of suffering that could be, much better than all the words I could say. But one of the people that I talked to in Gaza, they're right now in Mawasi Khan Yunis, which is a very highly increasingly overcrowded area with many displaced people coming from several areas across the Strip. And they said to me, we wish to have a wall inside our tent to stand against, just a wall inside our tent to stand against. So I just want to tell you in the end that Gaza has never left, and now the suffering has gone beyond imagination.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Can you just say very briefly, you mentioned that you understood that you're being targeted as a journalist on social media. Can you talk very briefly about the targeting of journalists in the Gaza Strip? And what does it mean that you understood on social media that you're being...
First, we've been failed by international media organizations and the committees to protect journalists over the course of the past 2 years. We've been calling on them for a very long time, but our calls have been fallen in deaf ears and blind eyes, unfortunately. And the targeted assassination of journalists has been clear, as I told you, and the reason behind that is that Israel would put up any claims and then they will hunt down any journalist. And the fact that we need to understand is that journalists in Gaza did not have the time to do the so-called secret terrorism that they have. You're seeing journalists posting 24/7 a day. You're seeing journalists working day in and day out. So when would they have the time to do secret journalism? But Israel just wants to make up excuses to target journalists, and that's what has happened with Anas al-Sharif. May God bless him and put mercy in his soul. And that's what has happened with the other journalists before me. But when I faced the threats, my family was afraid, and we knew, and I realized at that time that no one would protect us at all, because we've simply been failed. And that has happened with over 250 journalists, and it's been deliberate because the press fists in Gaza mark us as a target. They never ever protect us. And I'm sorry, but Western media has played the most major role in killing journalists in Gaza and has played the most major role in facilitating the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Had they done their job, this genocide would have been ended, but they will be shamed forever.
Just one question from me. Many journalists have died in Gaza. In your experience, are journalists working in Gaza supported by the news gathering organizations that either directly employ them or use them as stringers to provide evidence and information for them?
Well, the first thing is that, unfortunately, only the independent media outlets that are very supportive of journalists in Gaza. I work with the Electronic Intifada and Dropside News, which are independent media outlets in the US, and they're very supportive of journalists inside Gaza. But I've been talking with other journalists and media workers on the ground when I was there, and after I was there, and after leaving Gaza. And unfortunately, I've been horrified by many experiences that happened with them by the BBC, for example, commissioning them and not paying them. This is first, and other things by Sky News and other media outlets that would redact their names for no clear reason, just to avoid any pressure that they would face, and that, you know, Hamas-affiliated journalists, whatever. But literally, no one in Gaza, no journalist in Gaza has anything to do with Hamas. And even when you look at journalists in Gaza, they do not push any narrative that Hamas is pushing or whatever, because they're working independently. They just want to highlight the genocide and the suffering of people. And we know in the end that Hamas is an elected government in the end. So it's a government that we should work. So here, we wouldn't kill journalists for belonging to the Labour Party. We wouldn't kill journalists for belonging to the Tory party or whatever. So it's the same. But it's all excuses, and the support, and one of the reasons that the support towards Palestinian journalists in Gaza, we've been dehumanized, and we haven't been trusted. People think that we are feigning pain, we're feigning starvation, we're feigning all these feelings. No, we never wanted that. We never wanted war. We never wanted anything. We just wanted to live as human beings. But we want our homeland to be back, that our grandparents have been expelled from, and we want a dignified life. We want a life full of freedom, a life full of life, full of dignity and our human rights. But unfortunately, not only the media organizations, but the human rights associations, the human rights organizations, the international laws, all of them have been shuttered by Israel over the course of the past 2 years. And the Western world has always taught us that, no, we care about human rights, we care about everything, but then we haven't seen anything, because this is what racism and double standards are all about.
Thank you very much for that, Abu Bakr. Our next witness is Dr. Victoria Rose. I introduced her a few minutes ago, so please, you can continue. So please, Dr. Victoria Rose, the floor is yours.
So I'm a consultant.
Can you just put it?
Go very close to the microphone,
Yeah.
please.
Do I need to go back?
No, bring it towards you. Yeah.
I'm a consultant plastic surgeon. I've been a doctor for the NHS for 30 years. I have been working with a charity called Ideals since 2018, who regularly go to Gaza to help train local Palestinian surgeons, and I have been going with them since then. When the war started on October the 7th, Ideals was registered with the United Nations and the WHO EMT as an emergency medical team and started sending missions back to Gaza. We've attempted 21 missions now, and I think we've had 14 successful missions. I was on a mission in March to the European Gaza Hospital for 2.5 weeks, and then a mission in August for a month at NASA, and then I went back in May, June for another mission to NASA. I suppose the things that I can talk to you about really are the things that I've directly seen, and in terms of things that have been totally unacceptable during this war have really been the number of children injured. I think UNICEF have recently estimated this as 50,000 in Gaza, and when you compare that to 2,400 in Ukraine, you start to get a picture of what's going on. The mortality rate for a child during the war in Ukraine is estimated to be 0.7%, and that for a child in Gaza is 37.7%. I was operating on children every day, and during my last mission I would run a list of 10 to 12 patients, and the first 6 would be under the age of 15. And these are children that have suffered blast injuries, so they have either been burnt by the heat or the fire caused by the explosion, or they have been directly hit by the explosion, or they have been hit by shrapnel, so anything around them when the bomb went off is then whipped up and ejected at very high velocity and hits them. So we were seeing children with bits of their body blown off, essentially. I have some images. I don't know whether you want to see them, but just for the record, I looked at one day's operating in May, and we operated on 6 children. We started with an 18-month-old child. That's not the youngest child I treated, with a 15% burn. We then went on to a 3-year-old boy with a 35% burn. In the UK, that is a 50-50 survival burn, and it would go to probably one of only 2 units that would be able to look after that child. I then operated on a 5-year-old girl who had had her arm blown off. She was down for an amputation, but we managed to salvage half of her hand and most of her forearm and shoulder. I then operated on her sister, whilst my colleagues operated on her mother in the theatre next door. Her sister had had her left cheek and shoulder blown off. I then operated on a 7-year-old girl who had had her knee blown off. And my final case was a 13-year-old boy who had had his left ankle blown off. And his brother was being operated in the theatre next door. I think it's not just the children that we were operating on that affected us, but also the restriction in aid. And obviously lots of people talk about the malnutrition, which I will get onto briefly, but for doctors working in Gaza, we are restricted in lots of ways. The first ways in which we're restricted is actually gaining entry to Gaza. Before the Rafah border closed in May, we had very easy access through Cairo, across the Sinai Desert, through the Rafah border, and then we would be picked up by Palestinian colleagues and taken to our respective hospitals. There was no restriction on what we brought with us or the number of people that travelled with us. We just had to register with the WHO everything that we were bringing with us and who the doctors and nurses were. Once Israel and Kogat took control of entry and exit into Gaza, the situation changed and we were limited to 2 convoys a week. One would go in and come out on a Tuesday and one would go in and come out on a Thursday. It was one bus, there were 35 seats on it, and you had to apply for your seat a month or 6 weeks in advance, and you were told 2 weeks in advance whether you were on it or not. And then you made your way to Amman, and the night before it was due to leave, you were told by Kogat whether you would be permitted entry or denied entry or banned from entering. You are only allowed to take 1 bag with you on that bus, and it has to weigh 23 kilograms. You have to take all your food with you for the month and water for 3 days. You are not allowed to take any medical equipment. You are at the moment limited to 1,000 shekels in cash. You're not allowed to take more than 2 mobile phones, 1 computer. The issue that we have now is that since the ceasefire collapsed, the convoys are cancelled on a very regular basis. We would now estimate that nearly 60 to 90% of all doctors, this is specifically people that put their name down as a surgeon, anaesthetist or physician, are denied entry, and the WHO can give you information on that. We have recently had 3 major charities that were sending missions into Gaza on a weekly basis, deregistered by Kogat. That is Medical Aid for Palestinians, Rahma and PalMed. These are amongst apparently 32 organisations that have recently been deregulated by Kogat. As well as the entry of doctors being extremely hampered, so is the supply of medical equipment. Obviously, you are taking a risk if you take equipment into Gaza, because if it is found by Kogat at the Allenby border, you run the risk of you being denied entry, but also the entire team that you're with being denied entry. Very little supply gets to the hospitals at the moment. Some of the big NGOs have managed to get a few trucks in, but not enough to keep us stocked. When we were there, we ran out of analgesia, which meant that, unlike in the UK, when we amputate your leg, we'll give you some anaesthesia, some local anaesthetic into the stump so that you don't wake up in pain. we were not able to do that. So every day that I operated, the first 6 cases would be children, and the screaming in the recovery room would not stop until about 3 in the afternoon, and we had no analgesia to give those children. We also ran out of antibiotics. We had 2 types left, neither of which would be indicated in dirty open war wounds. We ran out of disinfectant solutions, which we ended up having to water down, and we ran out of scalpel blades, which we ended up having to re-sterilize. With regard to restriction of food, obviously the malnutrition is very evident now in the images that are getting out. I think we really noticed it in our colleagues initially. All of them had lost weight. All of the team that I went with lost weight. I lost half a stone in 28 days. I didn't see any fresh fruit or vegetables. I only ate the food that I took in with me. There was nothing else available. But I think malnutrition affects you in multiple other ways, and certainly we know that it enhances low mood and increases tiredness, and we really did see that amongst our Palestinian colleagues. Amongst our patients, probably the hardest thing was immunosuppression. So without adequate nutrients and vitamins, you don't mount the response, the immune response that you would need to. And so we were seeing a lot of preventable illnesses. And certainly at the moment, we know that there has been a sharp rise in an enterovirus causing diarrhea and vomiting. And what we have seen now is because of poor immunity, it has triggered an autoimmune response, something that we know as Guillain-Barré's syndrome, which means that you then make antibodies to your own nervous system. That starts with paralysis to the sensory nerves, so you get tingling and numbness, and then it progresses to skeletal muscle, and you get flaccid paralysis. As that flaccid paralysis rises, once it affects the diaphragm, that will stop you breathing, and then you die. We do see this in the UK, but it's very, very rare. Prior to the war, the Ministry of Health reported 2 cases per year in Gaza. The WHO last month reported 37 cases in people under the age of 15. And then lastly, just to talk about targeting the healthcare system, I am a colleague of Adnan Birch. He came to King's College to work with our team there, our orthopaedic team. I knew him well, and as you know, he was murdered during this war. I am also a colleague of Mohammed Abed's, who is still missing, and we cannot find his location. Multiples of my colleagues reported to me that they had been rounded up at Shifa and Nasser Hospital and held at gunpoint. One of my colleagues, Ahmed Maghrabi, told me that his theatre nurse was shot whilst he was standing next to him. My anaesthetist at Nasser was taken from Shifa and detained for a month. He told me that he was held with a bag over his head and his arms tied behind his back. He lost 1.5 stone in weight. He also reported that he was beaten every day.
Dr. Victoria, can we ask you a question?
Yes.
Jeremy? I can
Yeah,
ask it.
when you're trying to get into Gaza, how long do you often have to wait in Amman before you know if you're on the spot or not, or get in at all? Or how does the process work, and how many doctors don't get in?
The process is run by the United Nations WHO EMT. but they only control their access. So you know that they've given you a seat 2 weeks before you arrive. The final approval is given by COGAT, and it can come any time the day before you leave. It will never come before you leave, but it will never come before you arrive in Amman. You have to be in Amman, and then they will confirm that you're there, and then COGAT will say whether or not you can get in. The latest we were told was in February of this year at 10 o'clock at night, the evening before we were due to leave. We were told the whole team had been denied entry.
When you're limited on the food you take in, how on earth do you survive on only 23 kilos over a period of several weeks?
I won't lie, I don't really stick to that rule because I sort of know that they won't weigh the bag per se. So we do bring larger bags and put as much as we can in. To be honest, we survive on reconstitutable packet foods, the sort of thing that you take camping, like porridge, something that you can just put boiling water into, and you just take as many. You take one for dinner and one for breakfast, and that's all you take really, and some cereal bars. The rest of my suitcase normally is full of things that I'm taking for my colleagues. So when we first went in March, my colleagues asked me for mobile phones and chargers. When I went in August, there had been a blockage of sanitary products by Israel getting across to Gaza, and nobody had any soap or shampoo or toothpaste. So my colleagues asked me to bring them those items. When I went in May and June, my colleagues asked me to bring them energy bars and multivitamins.
And the UK government, has it supported your work? Has it put obstacles to the kind of work? Has it been present at all in these kinds of humanitarian initiatives by UK medical teams?
I would say I am absent, probably. I think that the UK government possibly had no idea how many of us were going to Gaza until the most recent trips in May and June, when we came back with footage of the malnutrition. And that's the first time that we've managed to meet with the UK government. We, as a body with the International Centre for Justice of Palestine, had written to Hamish Faulkner, well, we'd written to David Lammy and Keir Starmer initially in November 2024. We had no response for many months, and then Hamish Faulkner wrote back to us, and then we had nothing. We have emailed and irritated several MPs and parliamentary aides, and recently myself and my colleague Nick Maynard and some other colleagues of ours have had a Zoom call with the Prime Minister. We have met Hamish Faulkner face to face, and we've met Wes Streeting face to face.
And have these meetings led to any proactive actions by the UK government?
Not that we've been informed of, no.
Thank you very much. We will now invite Jeff Halper on Zoom.
You're welcome to stay there if you wish.
Yeah. Here he is. Jeff, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you take 7 minutes to provide evidence, and then we might ask you a few questions?
Yes, for sure. First of all, thank you for having me at this tribunal. It's a very important and timely event. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the political aspects of this, trying to give an overview, because in the end there has to be some political resolution. But I'm very moved, obviously, like we all are, by the testimony we've heard of people that have actually been there. I'm not there, and I wasn't there. I'm here in Jerusalem. So I'm talking on more of a political level. And therefore, I'm not going to relate to what's happening in Gaza today, but rather why. And what is the context? And why is the starvation happening? And why is the genocide happening? And the scale of destruction that we see. And I think it's really important for us, you know, we've been talking to medical people, to have a proper diagnosis. In other words, if you have a medical condition, it can be anything. The diagnosis is crucial for, obviously, for the treatment. And all these years, we've been talking about this as a conflict. The Arab-Israeli conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, two sides, which creates a false symmetry, making the Palestinians somehow a side in a conflict they had nothing to do with. And instead of conflict, we have to talk about Zionism as a settler colonial movement. We often use those words today, but we don't really unpack them and understand them. And without understanding that framework, that conceptual framework, without that diagnosis, you cannot get to a treatment and you can't understand what's happening in Gaza. And settler colonialism has its logic and has its process. And basically, it's when a population comes from abroad to another country with the intent of taking it over. It's not colonialism in the sense of the British in India. It's more colonialism in the sense of the British in Kenya to some degree, but even more so, with the idea that the Zionist movement had, and that Israel has until today, that Palestine is in fact the land of Israel. It belongs exclusively to Jews, and therefore the very purpose of Zionism for the last 130 years until today, and this is a stated policy of the Israeli government, is to Judaize Palestine, to transform an Arab country into a Jewish country, to take its land, displace its population, replace its population with a Jewish one, and then normalize. And you have a situation in which permanently Palestine is not only erased, but it's perceived as a Jewish country with a Jewish population. Now, without going into real detail, settler colonialism has 4 stages. One is invasion and initial settlement, and this happened, of course, before World War I. But what made it legitimate, because part of this tribunal is dealing with British responsibility, and a couple of speakers have mentioned this, of course, Zionism only gained its international legitimacy with the Balfour Declaration of 1917. And that was then taken whole cloth into the League of Nations mandate. Both the Balfour Declaration and the League of Nations mandate were dictated to the British government by Chaim Weizmann, the leader of the Zionist movement in Britain. And in the League of Nations mandate, the Arab population is not even mentioned. It's called the existing non-Jewish communities, even though they were the indigenous population living on 90% of the land, or they were 90% of the population. Only the national rights of Jews were recognized. The mandate was to prepare for a Jewish national home with no recognition of any Palestinian Arab national rights. And of course, that created, like all settler colonialism does, all colonialism does, resistance. And resistance is always criminalized. So from a very early stage of both Zionist history and the British in Palestine, the resistance of Palestinians has been called terrorism, or they've been called gangs of terrorists and so on. And that's very much the language we use today. So in other words, the answer of Israel, the response of Israel to all the testimony we've heard is, well, we feel sorry about that, but in the end, these are terrorists. And you have ministers in the Israeli government that say openly, even the children are terrorists. And that, of course, is to try to delegitimize and to take away the idea that, in fact, Gaza is a part of a national political struggle of Palestinians for their self-determination. It's not just a case in a conflict and there's an attack and there's a response and it just happens. No, it's a part of a process of all these years of taking over Palestine. The second stage is Judaization, and that happened after World War 1941 until today, again with the British largely responsible till 47, transforming Palestine into a Jewish state through settlement. That's why it's called settler colonialism. Now, the fourth stage, and I'm skipping the third stage for a reason, I will come back to it. The fourth stage is normalization. How do you win? How in fact do you succeed in transforming an Arab country into a Jewish one? You do it through normalization. You create facts on the ground, which are the settlements and the infrastructure and the highways and the displacement of the population, land expropriation, apartheid. You create facts on the ground, and then they become normalized, and that's what's facing us with the Abraham Accords. We have to see Gaza as a stage before this final stage of normalization, where Israel, in fact, ends the so-called conflict, and its settler colonial movement succeeds. And therefore, the third stage is pacification, because you can't get the Abraham Accords completed. Saudi Arabia will not come in. The Emirates yesterday threatened even to pull out if Israel annexes part of the West Bank. You cannot have normalization as long as there is fighting, as long as there's still resistance. And therefore, where we are today is pacification, breaking all Palestinian resistance. And this isn't only Gaza, this is also in the West Bank, in order to prepare the way for normalization, to create an industrial quiet that allows the Arab governments and the international community to then recognize a Judaized Palestine, that's Israel. And when Netanyahu talks, why are they continuing this? Even the Israeli army doesn't want to continue this war. The Israeli public doesn't want it. What is Netanyahu saying? We have to listen to him. Total victory. What does that mean? The army says we've already beaten Hamas. But that's not enough, because as long as there's a Palestinian presence, as long as there's a presence of resistance, as long as we haven't eliminated the last Hamas fighter, pacification is not completed. You see? And that's why this is a war to destroy Hamas. And again, if then many Palestinians are considered Hamas, not just members of Hamas, but the population, including children, then we're talking about genocide. So this is, I think, the context in which we have to understand what's happening in Gaza. Gaza means nothing to Israel. It's really not considered an important part of, they want to settle it, of course, but the West Bank is much more important. So the importance of Gaza for Israel is twofold today. One, again, is to break all the resistance and destroy Hamas, destroy any Palestinian resistance to colonization in preparation for normalization. And then the second, of course, is ethnic cleansing. Because, and we know very well that Trump and Israel and others have a plan for basically expelling the population of Gaza to places like South Sudan or who knows where. And so if Israel can get rid of half the Palestinian population of the occupied territory, 2.5 million out of 5 million people, then it's gone a long way again towards erasing the Palestinian presence. So this, I would submit, is the political context in which the atrocities that we've heard about is happening.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We're running out of time, so we won't be able to ask any questions at this point. I want to thank Dr. Victoria Rose and Abdul Bakr and Jeff for their testimonies, and we will now move to the next panel.
Thank you. We would like to invite Emily Tripp, who's the Executive Director of Airways. She worked as a research manager and took the leadership of the organization in June 22. From founder and director Chris Woods. Her previous work includes working in humanitarian aid delivery in the Middle East with a focus on carrying research and managing assessment teams in Syria and Libya to help inform humanitarian responses. We'd also like to welcome Dr. Natalie Roberts. Dr. Natalie is the Executive Director of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, MSF in the UK, an emergency doctor. Natalie joined MSF in 2012, subsequently held emergency coordination roles in zones of conflict and crisis across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, including in Syria, Yemen, Ukraine, Pakistan, Philippines, Ethiopia, and Central African Republic. In 2016, she became the head of emergency operations for MSF during the Great March of Return protests in Gaza, when MSF provided care to thousands of Palestinians who had been shot by the Israeli military. And I'd also like to welcome Ben Jamal, who is the British Palestinian activist and has served as a director of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, PSC, the UK's largest pro-Palestine advocacy campaigning group since 2016, formerly CEO of Domestic Violence Intervention Project and a social worker. He brings decades of experience in grassroots campaigning, mobilizing large-scale demonstrations for Palestinian rights in the UK. We welcome you to the floor and invite you to present your testimonies, and if we may start with Emily Tripp.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for this invitation. It's a real honor to be able to speak alongside colleagues today. So I work for Air Wars. Air Wars is a UK-based non-profit organization. We act as a watchdog for civilian harm as it occurs in war zones around the world. We were founded about a decade ago, and in that time, we've documented civilian harm using a consistent methodology in many of the world's major aerial campaigns. This includes campaigns conducted by the United Kingdom and by the United States. Each of the thousands of incidents of harm we document is published on our website, clearly and transparently, both in the hope of pursuing accountability and as a lasting record of civilians killed. We share these records of civilian harm to help facilitate accountability processes, whether that's with media organizations, legal mechanisms, human rights investigators, the United Nations, or humanitarian groups. During the US-led coalition's bombing campaign against the so-called Islamic State, we referred all cases of civilian harm to the major militaries involved, and the United States has acknowledged hundreds of civilian deaths directly as a result of our work. In the days after October 7th, local human rights organizations in Gaza were forced to stop their field work as their staff fled their homes. Palestinian health ministry figures became subject to intense debate and critique, and international journalists, investigators have still not been allowed into Gaza. We decided we would try and address this gap with our own remote casualty recording methodology, which has proven reliable and trusted both in this context and around the world. In a letter to the MP Emily Thornberry on January 8th this year, Secretary of State David Lammy repeated this assertion also made by his predecessor, that the UK government was unable to carry out assessments of particular incidents affecting civilians in Gaza, and I quote, due to the opaque and contested information environment, as well as the challenges that the UK government had in, again I quote, accessing the specific and sensitive information necessary from Israel, their allies, about the intended targets and anticipated military advantage. Lammy is correct in acknowledging the complexity of the information environment. There is a vast and complex patchwork of information that surrounds each fatal incident for civilians in Gaza, as there is increasingly in war zones the world over. But this does not render this exercise impossible. This is the work our teams engage with. We work through this information environment, identifying sources from a Facebook page mourning the loss of a loved one, to images posted by journalists on Instagram, to pieces of paper held up to passing camera crews with lists of the dead after a single strike. Civilians are highly effective in documenting the world around them. In hundreds of incidents, there has actually been so much information that we have been able to deduce the exact coordinates of an airstrike purely based on open source imagery. To date, we've published detailed incident reports outlining where and how more than 10,000 civilians have been killed in Gaza. We have names, we have ages, we have professions. We know whether they were at home, sheltering in schools, whether they're in an ambulance with their families in hospitals, whether they were trying to find food at an aid distribution. We work chronologically, so we keep track of every single event every day, and we publish our findings on each strike as soon as we can. To date, we have identified more than 13,000 incidents of civilian harm, and we've published just over 1,200 on our website. These records tell us that by every metric, the level of civilian harm in Gaza is simply incomparable with any 21st century air campaign. It is the most fatal conflict for civilians that we have ever documented. And we aren't just coming to this conclusion now, we knew this weeks into the war. In October 2023 alone, we recorded at least 1,900 children killed. That is around 7 times more child fatalities than the deadliest month of any previous air campaign that we had documented. In 9 out of 10 incidents where women were killed, they were killed alongside a child. We found that on average, when civilians were killed alongside family members, they were killed alongside at least 15 of their relatives. This is not like anything we've documented before. These findings indicate a war on populated areas on a scale that would have been unimaginable in wars prior, especially in wars conducted by Israel's allies like the United Kingdom. We use this event-based methodology and we work through open source investigative techniques. This allows us to orient civilian deaths in time and place. It also allows us to identify trends in real time, which were occurring very early on. In those opening weeks, we found that each strike was proving more deadly for civilians than in wars conducted by Israel's allies, to which Israel was comparing itself favorably. We found at least 65 incidents of civilian harm in the first 3 weeks, where at least 20 civilians were killed. So that is 20 civilians killed in a single strike or kind of series of strikes in a single location. This is 3 times the number of high fatality incidents we recorded during the Battle of Mosul, a battlefield so deadly that the UN deemed the whole city almost uninhabitable after the campaign was over, and bodies are still being recovered almost a decade later. These trends have remained consistent as the war has progressed. On March 18th this year, the day that Israel broke the ceasefire, we recorded what may turn out to be one of the bloodiest days of the war. Our teams identified almost 100 different incidents of civilian harm, that is the targeting of 100 locations across Gaza where civilians were killed or injured. To date, we've published a handful of these cases on our public archive, and the pattern has held. Patterns such as the destruction of whole families on family homes, high numbers of child fatalities in a single strike, all in that single day of bombardment. In recent months, our teams have documented attacks at aid distribution sites, publishing more than 25 separate incidents detailing civilians killed or injured while seeking aid. We've looked at attacks on civilians sheltering in schools, publishing more than 80 such incidents. And we spent this week looking at attacks in Gaza City as we have seen the campaign intensify. After the attack on Nasser Hospital, killing journalists and first responders last week, we shared our records with a number of media outlets detailing more than 20 other potential so-called double-tap attacks, where first responders have also been reportedly hit in rescue and recovery efforts. To Lami's point about challenges in understanding the intended targets from Israel. Last year, we released a film and an interactive map where we reviewed footage posted by the Israeli military themselves on their own social media accounts describing their targets, and we were able to link these statements to hundreds of civilian fatalities. Over the last year, we've documented 33 incidents involving attacks on civilians sheltering in schools, where we know exactly what the targets are because Israel has acknowledged it, in many cases declaring these strikes to be attacks on Hamas command and control centers. We have documented 467 civilians killed in these incidents alone. We've been able to review and analyze significant evidence of harm in Gaza, and we are a very small team. We are a dedicated and focused organization. We have expertise and experience on this single issue, so we know that others with maybe competing priorities and interests can't always take on this exercise, but that's why we've worked so hard to publish every case as soon as we complete our research with as much detail and transparency as possible. Every incident we publish includes all of our sources, which we also digitally archive in the event that sources get deleted or removed. Our assessments have been cited by the South African legal team at the International Court of Justice, by colleagues at GLAN in their case against the UK government. They've been cited in the US Congress by major international media outlets from the New York Times to The Guardian. In September 2024, we were named by the House of Commons Library as one of 4 fact-checkers on information in Gaza, and we have briefed officials in the UK FCDO on multiple occasions to explain our methodology and our findings and our approach in detail. This material is not confidential. It is being put online every day by Palestinians living under intense bombardment. Thank you.
Quickly, so first of all, even though you do note that the media has taken forward some of the data you provided, how, in a more general scale, would you assess the media's engagement with the data that you have provided? And also, have you noted a change in the weaponry that's being used in comparison to prior armed conflicts that you have documented in terms of the damage caused as well as the technology used?
Thank you. On the media engagement, I think one of the perhaps most disappointing and challenging things has been the sporadic media engagement. So we have been documenting every single day since October 7th, as have journalists inside Gaza. And what we've noticed is that the media engagement sort of comes at a flurry almost unpredictably. I mean, we saw a lot of engagement around the Nasser hospital strike last week, as we should have. We saw a sort of flurry of engagement around the World Central Kitchen strike, again, as we should have. And in all of those circumstances, Air Wars is often invited to speak and interview and say, okay, we'll put this in the wider context. And each time I have constantly been surprised that the journalists we're speaking to are also surprised that this attack has happened. You know, in the case of the Nasser hospital strike, we had a lot of questions around, oh, what is a double tap strike? You know, we saw a double tap strike or a report of a double tap strike on the 8th of October, 2023. So I think, I mean, when it comes to media engagement, I think there are a number of really brilliant journalists out there who are doing a lot of reporting, both inside Gaza and outside. And the challenge is a sort of attention span. But a challenge is also normalization of very high fatality incidents. So I mentioned in this testimony, you know, this number of 20 civilians killed per strike. I mean, this is something that in previous campaigns would have been extremely unusual. In May 2021, if you remember, there was a strike on Wahda Street with, it was a tunnel complex, and I think it was more than 40 civilians died, and it really captured the world's attention, and we had a lot of reporting on that. We've now seen so many of those, and each one of those has not had that level of attention. So I think it's a kind of, a flurry of information, attention, and then this kind of sporadic engagement. And then in terms of the weaponry, in terms of previous wars and campaigns, I mean, it's rather consistent, to be honest. I mean, we're seeing weapons that have been used, you know, from old arsenals that the Israelis have had for a number of years. The thing that is distinct is not necessarily these weapons. I mean, we as an organization were founded particularly to look at Obama-era sort of so-called precision strikes in contexts like Yemen. I mean, that language, the narrative is all very consistent. The technology is moving forward in all sorts of frightening ways, as we heard from the doctors earlier today. The thing that is distinct is the consistent and intense and frequent use of those weapons, particularly those weapons on tents, on residential homes. So I think, I mean, I can submit information to you afterwards. We also do a lot of kind of identification of munitions, but that's the distinct thing is essentially their use.
One question from, sorry, Neve.
Just to follow up on that, wouldn't you say that Israel's use of AI and machine learning is a new way of warfare, creating target banks like the Lavender program, the Gospel program, and Where's Daddy program? And have you seen that in any other war zones?
I mean, the Israelis are not the only military that are using AI to assist targeting. We know that, I mean, the Americans did a wave of strikes in Iraq and Syria last year, and they acknowledged that they were using AI in the kind of assisting in the military campaign and target selection. I think the thing that's very difficult to understand is exactly how this new technology is being used, the automation of target selection, how that's being used and where the accountability is, where the oversight is. I think there are a lot of sort of misconceptions around how a particular strike is carried out. There are lots of people involved in making a decision around whether or not a strike is carried out. It's not a kind of entirely automated robotic system. So that means that there is still, you know, an unending room of accountability when it comes to this. I think the thing that we've seen, particularly from the reporting around the use of AI, like the Lavender Where's Daddy program, are the speed and scale of that warfare. And I think the important question for us is not to get distracted necessarily by the use of technology, but to say, how exactly are those strikes being decided upon and who is accountable at the end of the day? And I think that's consistent. I think we're going into a future of warfare where the use of AI to some extent is inevitable, and we just need to be able to, as a society and as a community, be able to hold those militaries to account and ask the right questions and understand those applications in quite some detail.
Thank you for what you've said. Just one quick question. When you've been briefing journalists or ensuring they've got access to stories, information, and so on, do you come across any examples of interference from the host broadcasting company, either back in London or New York or wherever they happen to be, to try to sanitize the news story that has been sent of the reality of what's happening in Gaza?
I mean, we're not sitting in the editorial rooms, so it's really difficult to say. I will say I've spoken to a number of particularly young journalists who are based outside of Gaza in the last couple of years, who have been trying to do story after story, and they haven't always been able to make it up into the front pages or kind of like into the publication pipeline. There are many reasons for that. I think from our perspective, it is this kind of steady chipping away of what is normal in warfare. And I think that's the kind of bigger danger in my sense of how editors are deciding this story versus this story, is this kind of sort of like normalized approach to understanding actually this event. Well, we saw 20 of these events. Why would we report on this one as if it's a news story? And that's the thing that I think has been more worrying from my perspective.
Thank you very much for your contribution and your testimony. We now invite Dr. Natalie Roberts to the floor.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you, sorry. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Roberts. So I'm an emergency doctor and the Executive Director of Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, or MSF in the UK. MSF is an independent medical humanitarian organisation. We provide medical care to people affected by conflict and violence, epidemics and disasters. We also speak out about what we witness and experience. We've been working in Palestine since 1989. We currently have over 1,000 Palestinian and 40 international staff working in hospitals, clinics, and other facilities in Gaza. I'm going to outline here why we believe genocide is happening in Gaza and how we have tried to alert the UK government about that. Firstly, we are witnessing mass deliberate harm of civilians through killing and injury. The entire population of the Gaza Strip has endured relentless bombardment by Israeli forces for nearly 2 years. They are attacked by Israeli airstrikes, drones, and tanks. Since October 2023, Israeli forces have killed at least 63,000 people, over 18,000 of them children, and a further 150,000 people have been wounded. An estimated 44,000 children are now orphaned in Gaza. These numbers don't begin to cover the full horror, given the number of people missing and yet to be accounted for. This includes Reem Abdulebdeh, a physiotherapist and a member of the board of MSF UK, who we believe was killed alongside her parents and siblings in their house in Khan Yunis in December 2023, when the area came under a massive Israeli ground and air assault. The bodies of her mother and sister were eventually recovered from the rubble in February 2024, but Reem's body has never been found. Reem is one of 12 Palestinian MSF colleagues who have been killed by Israeli forces in Gaza since October 2023. There is no safe space in Gaza today, and Israel's indiscriminate military assault across the entire Strip demonstrates that it considers the whole population as a legitimate target. Israeli military actions have repeatedly targeted civilians, with attacks leaving entire neighborhoods in ruins and families wiped out. Since June of this year, we have seen a new method of orchestrating the mass killing of Palestinians: the Israeli and US-led militarized food distribution system known as the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF. There is nothing humanitarian about the GHF. Distributions at GHF sites are accompanied by extreme levels of violence and killings of Palestinian men, women, and children who have gone to the sites in the hope of receiving food, only to come under fire from Israeli soldiers. MSF medical teams are treating people with gunshot wounds, barbed wire lacerations, and crush injuries from stampedes sustained whilst trying to receive aid at these GHF distribution sites. Between the 7th of June and the 24th of July this year, in just 2 of our facilities in Gaza, we received 1,380 injured individuals and 28 dead bodies from 2 GHF distribution sites. This represents only a fraction of the total number of people killed and injured at these sites. During that same period, the Ministry of Health in Gaza reported that more than 1,000 people were killed and 7,200 injured while attempting to collect aid. One of them was our colleague, Abdullah Hamad, who was killed on 3rd of July, along with at least 16 people, when they were targeted without warning by Israeli forces as they waited to collect flour from an aid truck in Khan Yunis. Secondly, we are witnessing deliberate mass displacement of the population and the destruction and targeting of the infrastructure essential to support life in Gaza. The IDF has forcibly displaced 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, often giving them only a few hours to evacuate if they receive any warning at all. Gaza, which is smaller than the Isle of Wight, now sees 87% of its 2 million residents crammed into just 12% of its territory, primarily in Al Mawasi, which is an area no larger than Richmond Park in London. People are not given sufficient time to move safely. After countless displacements, many have run out of money and can no longer afford to relocate, and anyway, there is nowhere for them to relocate to. This week, Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, where MSF teams are working, received the dead bodies of at least 9 people, including 5 children, who were killed while trying to collect water in Al Mawasi, which is the area of Gaza that is supposedly designated as a safe zone. All of our MSF colleagues have been displaced multiple times. My colleague, Dr. Mohammed Abu Baghazi, told us, "Before she died, my mother told me death can sometimes be a relief. I didn't understand her at the time, but today, after all I've been through, I do. Displacement is harder than death. I've been forced from my home, stripped of safety, carrying my bag from one destroyed place to another. We endure hunger that eats at our bodies, and a constant fear that drains our minds, and a psychological stress that never stops. It follows us in every breath, every thought, every sound of the night. And then there are the missiles and bombs, the roar as they pass overhead, the whistle tearing through my sky, the dreadful silence before they strike, leaving me to wonder, is it my turn now? Now I know what my mother meant. Death may bring peace, but what I lived through, this hunger, this endless fear, this unrelenting stress, is a pain far beyond death. Through the destruction of vital civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, shelters, schools, food production capacities, and water treatment plants, the Israeli authorities are purposefully and systematically destroying the conditions necessary for Palestinian life in Gaza. On the 25th of August this year, Nasser Hospital was targeted once again in a double airstrike. It's the only partially functioning public hospital in southern Gaza. The attack killed 21 people, including health workers and journalists. One MSF colleague sustained injuries to the side of his chest. Nasser is just one of many hospitals that have been repeatedly hit. Over 1,500 healthcare workers have been killed since October 2023, and hospitals are unable to function under the relentless bombardment. As of the 9th of August, not a single hospital in Gaza is fully functional. Only 18 out of 36 are partially operational. Amongst the humanitarian and healthcare workers killed were Dr. Mohammed Abu Najela and Dr. Ahmed Al-Sahar, MSF doctors who were working in Al-Awda Hospital when it was hit by an Israeli strike on the 21st of November 2023. We had repeatedly informed the Israeli authorities that Al-Awda was a working hospital with medical staff and therefore protected under international humanitarian law. Our colleague Ala Al-Shawa, a nurse, was killed on the 18th of November 2023 when a clearly marked MSF convoy came under attack from Israeli forces in Gaza City, despite having authorization to evacuate the area. Ala was shot in the head. His MSF colleagues tried to stop the bleeding, but they were unable to save his life. Israeli raids on hospitals have resulted in the arbitrary detention, torture, and forced disappearances of health workers, including MSF staff. On the 26th of October 2024, during a raid on Kamal Adwan Hospital, MSF surgeon Mohammed Obeid was arrested with 57 others. He is currently held in an Israeli prison. No formal charges have been brought against him. For over 9 months, Dr. Abed has been completely cut off from his family and from us and has lost significant weight. Medical staff seem to be systematically targeted as one element of the deliberate dismantling of the health system in Gaza. The consequence is that civilians are left without life-saving care. Patients with trauma injuries, chronic diseases, communicable illnesses, malnourished children, and pregnant women are dying from preventable causes. Our medical teams are working under the harshest of conditions with little food for themselves, while they're watching patients die due to the Israeli blockade and bombardment. So finally, we are witnessing a blockade of supplies, and food is being used as a weapon of war. Israel's blockade of Gaza and deliberate obstruction of humanitarian assistance have all but destroyed everything essential for people to meet their basic human needs, turning survival into a daily battle. As Israel controls everything that enters Gaza, the survival of Palestinians in the Strip lies at the mercy of Israeli authorities. On top of that, people are now obliged to seek food at these GHF distribution sites, which are controlled by the Israeli military, who regularly open fire on them, forcing people to choose between starvation or risking their lives for minimal food. By preventing this access to food, as well as choking off access to water, medicines, and humanitarian supplies, Israel has manufactured a situation of famine in Gaza. During the 34 days while the UK Parliament was in recess, the malnutrition rates amongst children under 5 in Gaza tripled. Over 44,000 children are currently enrolled in our therapeutic feeding programs. We're facing overwhelming demand at our 4 outpatient feeding centres across Gaza, and famine has been declared in Gaza. Also, while the UK Parliament was in recess, nearly 4,000 Palestinians were killed and over 16,000 were wounded. Over 2,000 patients underwent surgery with little or no anaesthetic, and nearly 5,000 people were hospitalised with severely limited access to pain relief. Due to the lack of availability of medical supplies and the poor hygiene conditions due to the lack of availability of water, people are suffering from recurrent diarrhoea and they're dying from preventable diseases. Essentially, this is a complete and utter humanitarian disaster, and it is entirely man-made. In summary, I stand by our position that MSF teams in Gaza are witnessing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, according to the definition laid out in the Genocide Convention. So we have written 7 letters to the past and current Prime Ministers and Foreign Secretaries of the UK to bear witness to what has been happening in Gaza and to ask about the UK's support of Israel, and to ask that the UK takes action to prevent and punish crimes against humanity and genocide in line with its international commitments. When we have received a reply from a more junior minister, it's very perfunctory, it doesn't acknowledge the gravity of the situation or really acknowledge the gravity of the evidence we're providing. We have not received any response to our latest letters. We provided the UK government a link to a compilation of information and testimonies collected by MSF teams in Gaza between the 7th of October 2023 and the 1st of February 2025, which goes into far more detail than I can in this testimony today. We've also provided them with a copy of our report, compiling frontline testimony from MSF teams who are treating systematic mass casualties from the GHF sites in southern Gaza. And we've been asking for a meeting with the Foreign Secretary for nearly 2 years, but we've still not received an invite to meet. So we can only conclude from our perspective that the UK government doesn't want to acknowledge what we have to say and what we have been seeing. So thank you very much for providing me with the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roberts. We appreciate your time and your very valuable testimony. We would move now to Mr. Benjamin. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. There's a poem by the American poet Mary Oliver called Tecum Seh. It's about another genocide, the genocide of the Native American people, and it contains this line: "There is a sickness worse than the risk of death, and that's forgetting what we should never forget." I came across this on the website of the Genocide Scholars Association, who last week added their judgment to the body of lawyers, human rights organisations, who have declared that Israel's actions in Gaza since October 2023 meet the definition of genocide. I quote these words here because part of the work of this tribunal is to add to the historical documentation of these crimes. But this tribunal is, of course, sitting at a moment when the genocide is not ended, and horrifically, incomprehensibly, unimaginably, may be entering its worst and most barbaric stages, with the unfolding famine caused by Israel's imposition of a complete siege on Gaza following its tearing up of the ceasefire in March, and now, of course, exacerbated and worsened by the launch of the intensified military assault on Gaza City as a prelude to the forced removal of every Palestinian to the south, eventually, according to openly declared plans, to be corralled into what can only be described as a concentration camp to be built on the ruins of Rafah, what was described in exactly those terms by the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, all as a prelude, again, to the openly discussed possible mass expulsion of all Palestinians from Gaza. When I came across that poem, I was reminded of some other words I heard spoken many years ago in Trafalgar Square, a PSC rally by the then Palestinian ambassador Afif Safir. He said this: "Do not make the mistake of presuming in the inevitability of progress. Do not make the mistake of presuming in the certainty of the liberation of the Palestinian people. There is another possible future mapped out for us. It is that we become the Native Americans of the Middle East." He was talking about what Jeff Halper was talking about earlier, Israel's long-standing plan for the complete erasure of the Palestinian people and its possible enactment through mass killing and mass expulsion. I remember when I heard those words, with everything I knew about the driving logic of Zionism and what it had led to, that I did not think it possible, with all the institutionalized infrastructure of human rights and international law, that Israel would be allowed in the 21st century to enact a crime on such a scale. And yet here we are, nearly 2 years in, and as we have heard, more than 63,000 slaughtered, uncounted thousands buried under the rubble, more than 143,000 people injured, and the destruction of all of the infrastructure of life in Gaza. Now, there are others better placed than me to detail the scale and shape of these crimes, including the scale of their human impact. They have all done so throughout the morning in forensic and visceral detail. I, like most of you, have witnessed this from afar. Although Palestinian, I have no family in Gaza, indeed, no family anywhere in historic Palestine. All of my relatives were expelled in 1948 or forced into exile soon after that. So what I've been asked to do today is to say something, echoing Jeff Halper's contribution, about how we got here and Britain's role in how we got here. That seems to me to be an essential part of making sure we do not forget what we should not forget. And so we have to address two fundamental truths. The first is that history did not begin on October the 7th, that this genocide is built on the foundations of an incremental genocide, decades old, 76 years of settler colonization, occupation, and apartheid, and imposition across all of historic Palestine, from the river to the sea, of what B'Tselem, in its 2021 report detailing the realities of apartheid, described as a regime of Jewish supremacy existing from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And the second enduring truth, that this system of oppression could not and has not been sustained without the complicit active support of Western governments, public bodies, companies, and corporations. And we know that British complicity in supporting this regime of oppression extends back over 100 years to that initial support of the Zionist project that led to the Balfour Declaration. Remember the words of Balfour justifying his declaration, that the interests of Zionism were of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. It is possible to argue that in all essential elements, British policy towards the Palestinian people since that time has been marked by a continual refusal to acknowledge that fundamental dynamic of racist domination which was the driving logic of the Zionist project. It endured that complicit support throughout the 18 years following the establishment of the State of Israel, when Palestinian citizens were forced to live under martial law. It has endured throughout the 58 years of illegal occupation of Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and the establishment of illegal colonies across those territories. It has endured through 18 years of blockade on Gaza and periodic brutal military assaults on the territory. It endured even when human rights organisations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty and B'Tselem provided comprehensive reports detailing the reality of apartheid across all of historic Palestine. It has endured throughout the horrors we have seen in the live stream genocide over the past 2 years. None of that has been enough to disrupt a policy of enduring support for Israel based on the lie that it is a liberal democratic state which should be treated as an ally rather than a state practicing crimes against humanity, including now the crime of genocide, a state that should be subject to a comprehensive body of sanctions, a state that no one should sell arms to, no one should do business with, no one should cooperate with militarily, politically, diplomatically, until its system of racist oppression has been fully dismantled. And the additional aspect of the policy of successive governments, which has reached a height, or if you prefer, a low in the last 2 years, is to devote energy not just to support for this project of racist oppression, but to active suppression of opposition to it from British citizens. We saw this under previous Tory administrations who attempted to bring in a law to prevent public bodies from making decisions to divest from companies complicit in supporting Israel's crimes. We've seen it over the last 2 years in the unprecedented usage of the Public Order Act to impose conditions upon the national marches that we have been organising, including banning marches on the grotesque basis that they are a threat to the Jewish community if they pass anywhere in the vicinity of a synagogue, and the issuing of charges against leaders of the movement, including myself, for protesting those restrictions. We see it right now in the grotesque decision to designate Palestine Action, a group using non-violent direct action to target Elbit Systems, Israel's leading arms manufacturer, as a terrorist group, and now the farcical spectacle of the arrests of those holding up placards to protest against that prescription. So right now, our urgent task is to end the genocide and to prevent the intended erasure of the Palestinian people. This will not occur without external pressure placed on Israel through the imposition of sanctions, but those sanctions must be directed at not just ending the genocide, but then dismantling the entire structure of apartheid. Within the solidarity movement, we see our ongoing task as building the mass movement required to ramp up pressure on government to impose such sanctions, including a full two-way arms embargo, but also on public bodies and complicit companies and corporations. The stakes really could not be higher. The last 2 years have demonstrated another truth asserted for decades by Palestinian civil society, that their struggle for liberation is integral to all struggles against systems of oppression. Eric Cantona, one of my personal heroes, spoke to this truth recently when he said, if Gaza is lost, then humanity is lost. If this genocide is allowed to unfold to its last stages, or even if stopped, if Israel's system of racist domination continues to be supported, then the wider struggles against the far rights and their doctrines of ethno-nationalism, the battle for the preservation of any system of international law, and the battle to preserve fundamental democratic freedoms, including the right to protest, will also be irreparably damaged, if not lost forever.
Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you, Ben, for that very, very powerful contribution and the way you've put it to the inquiry this morning. Thank you for taking part. In your long experience of campaigning, do you believe that public opinion is now better informed and more focused on the issues of Palestine and Gaza, or do you feel that it's going in the other direction?
I would say it is significantly better informed, and particularly over the last 2 years. And I mean, Jeff Halper talked about this when he talked about the stages of implementing a system of racist domination. And part of that is narrative control. And part of that is convincing people to regard what is happening as something normal, to regard Israel as a liberal democratic state. I think what people have witnessed over the last 2 years has fundamentally shifted their understanding of that narrative, and that, to me, is what has fueled what has been unprecedented waves of solidarity globally, specifically here in the UK, not just manifested in the demonstrations which have been of unprecedented size and duration, but in the energy that people have been putting into campaigns calling for public bodies to divest, the energy people have been putting into campaigns targeting complicit companies like Barclays, and we're also seeing the impact of all of that. The horrendous paradox at the moment is there is a fundamental shift in public opinion. In all sorts of ways, Israel is more isolated in a court of global public opinion than it has ever been, but none of that has been enough to shift the dynamics of governmental behavior, and that has enabled this genocide to continue.
I think it's finished now. This is the end of this session now. We're going to resume at exactly 1 o'clock, so that's in 35 minutes' time when Francesca Albanese will be giving evidence. Just to let you know that there are over 12,000 people following the proceedings this morning online, and if you think of that as a public inquiry in any hall in London, there's no hall in London that could take that number of people. So that's the degree of interest in what we're doing here today. Could I say an enormous thank you to all those that have given evidence this morning. The power of it, the clarity of it, and the information that's there is an enormous help in the kind of strength of the report that we wish to produce at the end of it. So thank you very much to every single one of those that have made the contribution this morning. So we'll adjourn until 1 o'clock. Thank you.